Jalopy is one of those games that seems interesting from its Steam page, but when you play it, you realize there wasn't much content past what was shown on there. Kind of like when a movie trailer includes all the good jokes or action sequences in the movie. Past the charming appeal of the Steam page, I found Jalopy to be a frustrating, shallow, and pretty boring driving game. But before I get more into that, let's talk about the basics of the game. The premise/story is simple. You and your uncle live in East Germany in the late 1980s, the Berlin Wall has recently come down, and you both want to do a road trip from Germany to your homeland of Turkey in your old jalopy. To do that, you'll have to make money along the road to pay for gas and keep your car repaired. What surprised me the most was that the game uses roguelike elements, but this doesn't actually turn out that great. The game dedicates each leg of the journey to crossing a country, with you entering through the border in the beginning and ending at the next border town, which functions kind of like a checkpoint where you can sell items you've picked up along the road, fill up on gas, and repair or replace parts of your car. At the start of each section of the journey, you have to choose between 3 different routes, which have different hazards or amenities. Things like the condition of the road, length of the route, and possible stops for gas and supplies all vary. This tries to present the player with a difficult choice. Will you take the shorter but more hazardous route, or the safer but longer one? But due to some mechanics which I'll talk about later, I don't think this works out that well. Once you hit the open road, the route itself is randomly generated from a set of pre-made tiles based on what you chose. The reasoning for this, I suppose, was to make the game more replayable, but in my opinion, it makes things more boring because there don't seem to be a whole lot of tiles for the game to choose from, so you'll end up seeing the same scenery repeated a lot. It also doesn't help that the look and feel of the game is pretty boring, especially outside the cities. Low poly art styles can be visually interesting, but this just feels flat and lifeless. Not to mention the graphical glitches getting in the way, like this low quality sun clipping through the terrain. Now, the main way you make money is by opening these loot boxes on the side of the road, which contains random stuff that you can sell in town. You can also sometimes find broken down cars on the side of the road to salvage free parts from, but I almost never found anything good in these. As I said before, at the end of each leg of the journey, you'll pull into a motel in town near the next border, where you can harass the other patrons for money, and also check the news to see if certain items are banned or worth more in the next country you're going to. These motels are also where you're supposed to engage with the paper-thin story. Apparently every night you're supposed to read notes from the uncle's briefcase to get a better idea of what's going on. But I don't think the game ever prompted me to do this, so I didn't realize I could until nearly the end of the game. I did look up and try to read the pages I missed after the fact, but it was so boring that after about half a page, my eyes glazed over and I just pretended to skim the rest. Some of the story is also told through your uncle speaking to you while you're driving, but these are mainly just quaint anecdotes that don't really add much value in my eyes. They actually were more annoying than anything else because they appear as pop-ups that you have to click through while you're driving. It really feels like the story was an afterthought, especially with the way that it just abruptly ends when you reach Istanbul. It doesn't even tell you what to do, you just get the last note, and that's it. Do whatever you want at the end of this linearly designed game, I guess. But I was never interested in this game for the story, so that doesn't really bother me too much. What does is how this game's economy and vehicle damage system is just so stupid and frustrating. So probably the most important part of this game is keeping the jalopy running. The individual car components under the hood all take damage and will need to be repaired, replaced, or upgraded, and any damage they take affects the jalopy's performance depending on the affected part. So for example, you might be able to run the engine for a while with a broken water tank and no coolant. It's not going to be good for the engine, but it'll work. But if you outright break the engine itself, you're kind of screwed. Now, the thought of repairing engines might sound complicated, but it's not too difficult to understand when you get your hands on it. Yeah, you have to open up the hood and replace parts, but it's not like my summer car where you actually have to look at a manual and screw in every bolt. Everything just neatly slots into place with video game sorcery. What each part actually does is also pretty intuitive and explained well in the tutorial. The problem is that the car takes damage way too easily. The standard components only have 3 health, and a slight knock is enough to take 1 to 2 away. It doesn't help that the game doesn't model speed and distance on a 1-to-1 level with reality, so even if it looks like you're going pretty slow, according to the game you're going like 40 miles per hour. So seemingly slow crashes might do more damage than you'd expect. Another problem is that even if you don't crash, your parts get damaged through wear and tear, which happens ridiculously fast. Look, I'm not exactly a car guy myself, and I can't speak to the reliability of these old communist-style cars, but it seems unrealistic for your engine to be sputtering and dying after only a couple hundred miles. And it's even more annoying from a gameplay perspective, even ignoring the realism part. Keep in mind that this game is kind of like a roguelike, so if your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere and you don't have the supplies to repair it, you essentially have to restart. You can even game over if you reach town and don't have the money to buy gas or pay motel fees. And when you game over, you don't reload from the last city you started at, you have to start the whole journey again. Which means you see the same terrain, drive through the same towns, and drive the same old jalopy. So it's got some of the mechanics of a roguelike without actually having the fun replayability of one. Now, maybe restarting would be less of a problem if money was abundant, but with how much maintenance the car needs and all these other little things that you need to buy, you can easily get into a downward spiral. There is one item you can get to make this slightly better, the crowbar, which lets you unlock bigger locked packages on the road, which often have good stuff in them like medicine. But even using the crowbar, I still never felt like I had a safe amount of money. Even when I had extra, I always wanted to make sure I had a cushion in case I didn't find enough supplies on the road, or if I had a big accident that would need a lot of repair kits. Because of this tough economy and the threat of a restart, the game actually encourages you to play it as boringly as possible. There's no reason to choose the harder and maybe more interesting paths because they're obviously going to put more wear on the car. It's just plain obvious that driving a few extra minutes on the safer routes is worth the money you'll save on repairs. The Jalopy also has a decent number of upgrades, but because of the money situation, I completely avoided using any of them. I was saving all my money for repair kits, gas, motel fees, and to have that safety net just in case I got unlucky. Like, logically, why should I upgrade my engine to be slightly faster and risk not having enough money to repair things when I could just save all my money for essentials like repair kits and gas and just make it to Istanbul a little bit slower? The upgrades just seem to have way too high of an upfront cost for what they're going to give you. The game is also pretty buggy even this many years later. I ran into quite a few bugs during my playthrough. Most were harmless, but immersion breaking, like the AI completely glitching out or my windshield randomly breaking. But I did run into one which really annoyed me and set my progress back a lot. I was changing one of my tires and the game let me put a tire on the vehicle without correctly removing the previous one, which glitched them together and prevented me from doing anything with the vehicle, since you can't move it until everything is installed correctly. Hard restarting the application sent me back to the last city I was in, so my run was not ruined, but of course it didn't refund me for the fuel I had wasted, getting to the gas station, or the price of the off-road tire and car jack I had bought. And unfortunately, it seems like these bugs won't ever really be fixed because the developer seems to have been forced to move on to other projects due to disputes with the publisher. I found it difficult to get the full picture on what happened, so I'm not going to say much more than that, but needless to say that this game hasn't been updated since 2019, so buyer beware in terms of the bug situation. Now, even with this game taking 6 hours to beat, I still don't feel like it was an enjoyable and worthwhile use of my time. Once you get past the rather surface level novelties like slotting in parts and needing to turn the keys and pull the handbrake to start the car, you end up with a pretty shallow experience where you don't do much but drive and collect packages off the side of the road. Some people might argue that it's supposed to be simple because it's a driving game where you can just relax, but I didn't find having to constantly babysit the car very relaxing. It's more of a chore. And the lack of interesting scenery and the kind of clunky driving the game has aren't doing it any favors on that front either. I obviously don't recommend the game, but if you decide to get it, at $15 it's not a ripoff. It's not a terrible game, I just think there are much better games you could spend your time on for this price. And speaking of better games, check out these other reviews I've made. The links are on the screen right now. Very cool. And while you're at it, consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. See you soon, stay hydrated, peace.